In this desolate world, where everything lies in ruins, food is scarce. However, the children in this bleak place are always searching for anything that might have even a little value, because they can only get food if they have something valuable to trade. There's a golem that roams the barren streets, and whenever kids come across this walking piece of stone, they try to offer it something valuable in return for food. This golem only appears in Sector 50, and no one knows where it came from or who owns it. However, it's not always guaranteed that the golem will accept just anything in exchange for food. It has to be something the golem finds valuable, which is why children often end up with nothing in return. Right now, a group of kids is frustrated because the golem just refused to take their flashlight, even though it accepted one the day before. As angry as they are, they know better than to retaliate. There's always the risk they might end up dead. There's a saying that golems have been seen entering the streets and killing people. Then, there's this white-haired boy Ray. The moment he spots the golem, he quickly steps in its path and offers everything valuable he's managed to gather. The golem takes note of the items, grabs the bag, and flips it over into its mouth. Seeing the massive haul Ray just traded for, the onlookers are in awe. They have no idea how he managed to gather so many valuable items. What makes it even more frustrating for them is that this isn't the first time Ray has pulled off a trade this big. Meanwhile, the golem starts dropping food supplies, and the amount Ray receives is enough to completely fill his backpack. The kids on the sidelines can't help but feel jealous and angry. It just doesn't make sense to them as to why this one guy gets so much food while they're left starving. At one point, some of them even consider stealing his supplies, but a few of them quickly shut that idea down. Apparently, Ray has a reputation. People call him the ghost of 17th Street. As Ray walks from Sector 50 towards 17th Street, he suddenly senses the presence of people hiding in the shadows. His senses are so sharp that he can tell exactly how many there are. If he has to be precise, there are 7 people. So he invites all these sneaky bastards to step out and fight, especially since he already knows they've been following him for a while now. Enter this fat kid, backed up by 6 others. The fatty doesn't forget to give props to our boy's sharp senses because they made sure to stay undetected while trailing him, yet they still got exposed. This fat kid is Ron, and this isn't the first time this fat sucker has pulled a stunt like this. Ray has already warned this shithead not to cross paths with him again. The last warning was crystal clear. If Ron ever showed his face like this again, he wouldn't be able to walk afterward. But Ron doesn't seem to care. Instead, he makes it clear that he's not going anywhere unless Ray hands over his supplies. Just put the fries in the bag, lil bro, he says, throwing in a threat of his own, warning Ray that he won't be walking out of here safe and sound if he refuses. But Ray doesn't buy it for a second. If anyone's about to end up in bad shape, it sure as hell isn't him. Like I told you before, Ray has a reputation. He's the ghost of 17th Street, a white ghost who moves without making a sound, and anyone who tries to mess with him is the one who ends up in the worst possible situation. But Fatty lets his ego get the best of him. He makes the big mistake of throwing a punch at Ray, but my guy barely even reacts. He just tilts his head slightly and dodges that punch like it's nobody's business. He then uses this brainless fool's own momentum against him, making him trip. But before Fatty can kiss the ground, my guy grabs him by the shirt and delivers a devastating punch straight into his gut. That one blow is enough to leave this bastard's mouth wide open, and he hits the ground like a sack of potatoes. Seeing their so-called boss get wrecked effortlessly, the rest of the group starts flinching in sheer panic. But since they can't just back off in this critical moment, they make the foolish decision to charge straight at Ray. The first one swings a bat, but Ray ducks just in time, then counters with a brutal elbow smash that turns the guy's face into a bloody mess. He then follows up, taking down the next 2 just as easily, 1 hit per person. That's all it takes, and just like that, all 6 of them are one with the ground. Ray then turns back to Ron, who, upon seeing his impending doom, is cowering in fear. My guy makes it very clear that just because Ron brought a few more ragtag idiots this time, the outcome was never going to change. As he walks towards the fatty, the sucker finds himself cornered. Ray is now gunning for this bastard's legs to keep his promise. He already warned Fatty that if he showed his face again, he wouldn't be able to walk ever again. And my guy plans to keep his word. On the other hand, Fatty pulls out a dagger from behind his back, trying to threaten Ray. His hands are shaking, slick with sweat as he warns Ray not to come any closer. He keeps calling Ray a monster, but deep down he knows this dagger won't save his sorry ass. Speaking of monsters, there's actually a backstory behind that title Ray has been given. You see, ever since he was a child, Ray was very different from others. Whenever he got severe injuries, there was never any expression on his face, and that made people wary of him. Kids his age were supposed to cry when they got hurt, but Ray stayed expressionless. Even in desperate, hopeless times, when the other kids cried, Ray was the only one who never felt sorrow, hopelessness, remorse, or anger. Not once did a tear fall from his eyes, and eventually, the other kids stopped associating with the weird kid who just didn't react like they did. His lack of emotions left him completely alone. Even Ray himself acknowledges how emotionless he is, and he never wanted to be like this. He always wished to be a normal person, just like any other kid. It had always been his desire to learn and experience this thing called emotion in his life. But even now, 6 years later, he still can't feel anything. However, what he can do is read other people's emotions, and right now, he can tell that Fatty is getting as desperate as he possibly can. Ray reminds this coward that not using blades is an unspoken rule here. He questions this. Did he bring that knife because he actually planned to stab him from the start? Fatty spins some tale about how he just picked it up from the garbage earlier, but Ray sees right through the lie. He doesn't need words to tell when someone is lying. He can see it in the color of the vessel inside their chest. You see, Ray has the ability to see a world others cannot. Every person carries a small vessel within them, and whenever they feel emotions, certain colors of mana fill those vessels. Anger, hate, and love create red mana. Ridicule and apathy show up as blue mana. Joy and excitement result in yellow mana, and countless other colors exist, making Ray's world burst with shades no one else can see. Meanwhile, Fatty keeps issuing threat after threat, trying to intimidate Ray, but it's obvious this coward has no real intention of using the sharp dagger he's holding. Ray sees the deep black mana swirling in the bastard's chest, intense fear. With every step Ray takes toward him, the fear only intensifies. But our boy is ready to deliver the punishment this sucker truly deserves. A while later, Ray finally reaches his home. As soon as he enters the little tent where the others are staying, a bunch of kids eagerly greet him. The one with green eyes is Pale, the leader of the underpass children. All the kids crowd around Ray, smiling and clinging to him, proud to have such a dependable brother. Later, as they sit together, he instructs everyone to show what supplies they've gathered so far. Each kid presents what they managed to snag. Some have bubble gum, others chocolate bars, but it's clear this isn't nearly enough to feed all 7 of them. Naturally, everyone starts feeling anxious, unsure how to proceed. That's when Ray reveals his haul. Seeing the copious amount of supplies, all the kids perk up in happiness. Some even suspect he must have stolen everything from the golem. But there's a reason why Ray is the only one who manages to bring back so much food every time he goes fishing. The golem only takes magic items with residual mana. Since these kids can't see mana, they have no way of knowing which items are rich with it, so they always end up with nothing from the golem. Now that they finally have enough food, Pale steps up to divide it. Thanks to Ray, they'll actually get to fill their bellies before bed tonight. The kids line up youngest to oldest, with Josephine, the youngest, receiving her share first. While the food is being distributed, Ray quietly steps outside. He sits alone, lost in thought, reflecting on their miserable situation. No matter how hard they try, it's never enough. Someone always goes to bed hungry. He contemplates making a trip to the warehouse, where he might be able to secure a bigger haul. He wants to support these kids, no matter the cost. He owes them his life. Flashback to a year ago. Ray was buried in the snow, slowly freezing to death. These same kids found him and pulled him out. At the time, Ray had already accepted death. He thought it was fine to just fade away in the cold, but these kids saved him without expecting anything in return. They didn't care about repayment. But Ray has a principle. He always pays his debts, whether it's a favor or vengeance. He never leaves anything unsettled. As he sits there, deep in thought, Pale joins him, reminding him that he should get his share of food too. Ray casually declines, claiming he isn't hungry. Unfortunately, his grumbling stomach betrays him. Without a word, Pale breaks his biscuit bar in half and hands one piece to Ray. Just then, the rain starts pouring. But it's not normal rain. The droplets are black. It's a common occurrence in this desolate world. There are rumors that the black rain is a result of mages using too much magic. Apparently, mages live in the lower numbered sectors. Pale believes the golem was sent by a mage, but Ray isn't so sure. He suspects the golem might be a machine. Pale quickly disagrees, convinced that magic is what keeps it moving. Ray doesn't argue because he's actually seen the golems using magic with his own eyes. Whenever a golem walks around, it absorbs mana from the surrounding atmosphere, drawing it into its core. That mana then mixes within and is expelled as black gas. Ray is convinced there's a connection between the black rain and this gas. That's when he suddenly remembers something important. Without another word, he pulls up his hoodie and tells Pale he's heading out for a bit. Naturally, Pale is against it. The rain is too heavy today, so much that even rivers are overflowing. But Ray doesn't care. He has to do what he has to do. And with that he dashes off, leaving Pale sighing in frustration. Of course, Ray has a solid reason for doing this. When it rains, everyone shelters inside, believing that even a single drop of black rain is enough to make them sick. However, Ray knows how to shield himself from it, making things easier for him. Once he reaches 18th Street, also known as Limpfoot Hector's ration warehouse, he spots the thugs inside, gambling and having the time of their lives. Ray had expected this. He knew these idiots would be too busy gambling on a rainy day, which is why he chose today to make his move. Since no one guards the warehouse on rainy days, it gives him the perfect opportunity to sneak inside. The place is completely dark, but Ray has a solution for that. The air is filled with an abundance of mana in hundreds of colors. Ray begins drawing in specific colors, mixing them according to the right formula, and ignites a flame in the palm of his hand. Although he doesn't fully understand the principles of magic, he can use it just fine. Still, controlling red mana is particularly difficult for some reason. With the fire illuminating his way, Ray starts checking the supply boxes. As he rummages through them, a dagger suddenly whizzes by, so close it grazes his ear. His presence has been noticed. The bastards inside aren't too happy about some rat trying to steal their rations under their noses. Turns out these bastards were hiding behind a pillar from the start, almost as if they were expecting Ray to show up. There are 3 of them in total, and they seem to know exactly where Ray is hiding. What's even more concerning for Ray is that he didn't expect these bastards to be equipped with night vision goggles. They throw their daggers again at Ray, but he dashes down, dodging them left and right. Seeing this, the goons with the night vision goggles are baffled to think that a kid could dodge those daggers in this pitch-black place is just insane. The other goons berate their fellow to aim properly next time, but the poor guy gets rocked with a punch from Ray before he can even throw his dagger again. At this point, they're all bewildered at how this kid can see them in the dark. What they don't know is that Ray can easily see the color of their vessels. Right now, their vessels are glowing dark red because of the rage building inside them. One of them launches another dagger with all his strength, but Ray is already ready to dodge the oncoming strike by reading the flow of mana from the vessel through the arteries. Ray can predict and easily dodge the blow. Once he dodges, he follows up with a kick to the guy's neck. With 2 of them down, only one remains, but the last one also gets a solid punch to his gut for his troubles. And that's how the 3 of these suckers end up face first on the ground. This is when another bastard barges into the warehouse. This one sounds trouble because, as far as Ray can recall, this guy is Humphrey, the Hector Group's executive. The bald bastard is disappointed to see all 3 of his men kissing the dirt, and what's really tweaking him out is the fact that they were wrecked by a rat. Even Ray doesn't want to mess with this guy, so he pulls his hoodie back over his face and decides it's time to get out of there. He quickly dashes and tries to strike the bastard across the chest to move him away from the entrance, but that punch Ray lands is barely more than a minor inconvenience to this bastard. In return, he tries to grab Ray by his head, but Ray ducks backward just in time, barely escaping. The bald bastard then follows up with a punch that sends Ray skidding across the floor. The bald bastard acknowledges that Ray indeed has some solid reflexes for a kid his age. Meanwhile, Ray internalizes that this guy is packing some serious power. The bald bastard starts throwing punch after punch, but Ray manages to dodge them all, moving left and right with ease. While Ray might be able to dodge, he knows he can't keep it up forever. He needs to figure out something before he gets knocked out. That's when he notices a gap in the bastard's defense and quickly strikes his chest. As soon as his hand connects, he intensifies the fire in his palm, and that little moment of distraction is enough for Ray to vanish from the spot like he was never there. The others guarding the place quickly scatter around the warehouse, thinking that since that brat fought Humphrey, he won't be able to go far. Ray starts to feel concerned because, at this rate, he's indeed going to get caught, but then he notices a stone and throws it to draw their attention away. Those goofy asses take the bait and begin running in the opposite direction, while Ray makes his escape. He's finally succeeded in looting the infamous Hector Group warehouse, but he knows he's dead if they catch him. Though Ray isn't afraid of dying, what he fears is that if he's not around, the kids won't last long in this unforgiving world. Suddenly, the bastards catch up to him, so Ray picks up his speed, but soon he finds himself facing a dead end. Now that he's cornered, the bastards pull out their weapons and tell him to come here and spit out what he stole before they start poking holes in his stomach. Since he doesn't see Humphrey around, Ray feels confident that he can win, so he starts charging some mana in his fists. One of the bastards charges at him, but Ray sidesteps and delivers a solid uppercut to the bastard. Then comes the other guy rushing, but Ray quickly grabs the bastard's dagger hand and produces some electricity, frying the bastard's head and leaving him down for the count. Suddenly, Ray hears more of these guys coming toward him. It looks like they won't stop pursuing him until he's caught, and Ray isn't sure if he can use his magic indefinitely. This is when he notices the garbage bin behind him and quickly takes refuge inside. The bastards also search the area, but they find no one other than a few of their companions, so they continue forward, determined to find him. They can't afford to lose him. With the rain pouring heavily, the footsteps start to fade, which means no matter what they do, Ray is confident they won't find him here. He decides to stay in the bin for the night because if they follow him to the bridge, the kids will be in danger as well. With that, he spends the entire night in that bin. The next day arrives, and he wakes up to the light seeping through the cracks. He hops out of the dustbin but is immediately exposed by a bastard standing just outside the bin. Ray can tell just by the color of his vessel that this dude is absolutely angry, and our boy isn't sure if he can handle this bastard alone, given he hasn't fully recovered yet. The bastard finally lunges, trying to kill Ray, but that's when my guy also pulls a dagger of his own and swings it at the bastard. However, the bastard evades the attack and swings back at his opponent. While attempting to dodge the attack, Ray loses his balance and trips. This gives that bastard the perfect opportunity to deliver the final blow, but just before the shiny dagger reaches Ray's eye socket, someone shoots the bastard down, killing him on the spot. The bastard behind the trigger is another sassy guy who seems to already know about Ray. This guy is black-haired Niles, the 17th Street boss. He can't help but warn Ray about the dangerously close call he just had. If the gunshot was even delayed for a second, Ray would have been pushing up daisies. Ray, in response, questions him about why he is here since Niles is usually not awake this early, to which Niles says yes. He claims to have heard rumors that Hector's guys were on the prowl. He then notices the canned food Ray is hiding under his hoodie and is sure that Ray must have swiped the haul under Hector's nose. For that, he can't help but call out our boy for his bold move. Ray in return reciprocates with a thanks, but Niles clarifies that it wasn't a compliment, so there's nothing to feel proud of. Internally, Ray is unsure how to handle Niles because people like Niles have emotions so monotonous that their vessels never really fill up, so he can't tell what this dude is even thinking. Niles, on the other hand, warns him to be careful, or else he'll die if he continues pulling stunts like this. There are people he should not be mingling with, and Ray should know better, but for our boy, endangering his life is still better than starving to death. Well, Niles has no room to argue about that, so he just reminds Ray that they're both equal now. Ray saved him once, and Niles in return saved Ray, but Ray claims that he never intended to save him. Ray merely mistook Niles for supplies when he was floating down the river. But still, though, the blackhead can't deny the fact that he ended up living because of this little brat. Still, as far as Ray remembers, he's already been repaid for the favor. In order to provide some context for what they're talking about, we transition a year back in time. There, Ray happened to pull Niles out of the river. Apparently, Niles used to be an executive of the 46th sector, but he was betrayed, or at least that's what Niles claims to have happened, though Ray is sure it's not a lie, especially since Niles was the one who taught him lessons as a repayment for saving his life. This is when Ray brings up the important question. He asks Niles if he can join an organization. If he has to be specific, he wants to join Niles's organization. The only reason Ray wants to join the organization is to keep those kids safe. Niles does not give any immediate response. He just walks away from the scene and stands behind a wall. He then asks an unexpected question, asking Ray if he can use magic. Ray is shocked and questions him how he knows this much, to which Niles does not respond outwardly, but inwardly he's very intrigued to realize his hunch is right on the money. Initially, he had seen Ray lighting up a fire without a lighter. Ray, on the other hand, continues to question him about how he knew he could use magic. Niles finally speaks, claiming that one fellow magician had told him that there is mana in the air, which is used for magic, and that there are only a handful of people who can detect and use mana. Ray then asks him if his fellow magician also mentioned something about colors, to which Niles does not remember any mention of colors, but his fellow magician did claim that mana is invisible and cannot be seen with the naked eye. This sparks Ray's curiosity even more because he can clearly see these different types of colors in the air. Ray questions him once again, asking if he might be forgetting some crucial detail, but this only agitates Niles as he believes he has already told Ray everything he knows, and at this point, Ray is just trying to push his buttons by asking the same thing over and over. Back to the topic at hand, Ray wants to know if his request to join the organization will be approved or not, to which Niles declines his request for some obvious reasons. When Ray inquires about the reason behind this blunt rejection, Niles once again gives Ray the silent treatment. In order to learn the real reason behind Niles's hesitation to take Ray into the organization, here's a bit of background. You see, all the sectors are along the Elton River. If you go up to the river, you'll arrive at other sectors, and you could probably escape the slums and find a better life there. So, Niles believes that it would be too much of a waste for a kid with such abilities to die here. Well, we now know the reason behind Niles's rejection, though he does not say this out loud to Ray. Instead, he simply asks Ray if the thought of leaving the 50th sector has ever crossed his mind. He even offers to help find him a car if he plans to leave this place. Ray, however, simply declines the proposition as he has kids to take care of, but Niles assures him that he is already planning to open an orphanage here, so Ray can leave the kids in his capable hands. He promises to give a better life and make sure they are not dying in the streets. Meanwhile, Ray can't figure out if this guy is bluffing or telling the truth, especially since his vessel color doesn't change at all, though Ray is not doubting Niles, especially since this guy has always kept his word. Ray then warns Niles about Hector's group because those guys seem to be preparing to start a war. Ray knows this for a fact because he had seen them receive truckloads of weapons, but it looks like Niles knew about this already. Not to mention the fact that he just killed one of their guys is a definite declaration of war. Ray reminds him that the people in the stores will suffer if he loses the war. Suddenly, Niles's driver calls him out, reminding him that they should be leaving now. With that, as Niles makes his way inside the car, he reveals to Ray that it's going to be a war zone here, so Ray better find another hideout if he can. Before leaving, he throws this little potion bottle to our boy and tells him to heal his injured ear with this. With that, he leaves the place in his car. We then get back to 17th Street near Central Square, where we meet one of the kids from the Underpass Children's Group. The kid gets excited to see Ray finally back, but his happiness quickly morphs into worries when he notices Ray injured. But Ray quickly tries to assure the sobbing kid that he just fell, nothing else, while the poor kid wipes his tears off, feeling relieved and happy that he was not in fights. Ray notices this whirlwind of emotions inside this kid. To think that a single person can feel so many emotions at once is something that never fails to fascinate him. He then hands over all of the canned food to the kids and tells her to head to the tent first and also inform Pale that he will be back soon. By the way, this kid's name is Josephine. While the kid walks his own path, Ray turns to the old woman Viola and asks her if she told Josephine anything. Apparently, this old woman is blind, which explains why she didn't react when Ray appeared in the scene. She is a storyteller. She responds to Ray's question by answering that she was just telling her about the rainbows. Ray gently cautions the old woman to perhaps not always tell the kids these fantastical stories because he doesn't want them to develop feelings of inadequacy, and it could make them less content with the streets they are currently living in. But Viola believes that children should be encouraged to imagine and dream beyond their immediate surroundings. Ray takes note of the color of her vessel, and it appears to be purple, but he is not sure what feeling this purple color might represent because he has never seen this color in anyone else besides Viola. Ray then warns her about the impending conflict that is looming on the horizon and advises her to consider moving to another street before things escalate. After this little exchange, our boy walks away while Viola can't help but notice how considerate Ray is for a child. The next morning, our boy runs some errands as a delivery boy. When the shop owner opens the gate, he is surprised to see Ray in front of him, since he was expecting Ron to show up with deliveries. While my guy pretends not to know, deep down in his mind, he can't help but think how that unfortunate fatty got both his legs broken, so he is essentially a helpless person. Ray then politely inquires if the shopkeeper is not planning to evacuate as there won't be any customers if a conflict arises, but the shop owner claims that he has nothing other than this store, and as for the war, he is quite certain that it's not going to happen. Hearing this, Ray gets intrigued and inquires about the reasoning, to which the shop owner explains that Hector's group and Neil's are currently in discussion, so if things are resolved peacefully, there won't be a conflict. Right at that moment, the gate of the room where the meeting was going on opens up, and we see a group of men from Hector's group. The man with scars all over his face is actually the leader of 18th Street, whose name is Hector, the leader of Hector's group. My guy quickly pulls his hoodie over his face. Hector, on the other hand, is intrigued by the fact that a child is working in this place while all the adults have fled. He then places his hand over Rei's neck as a gesture of appreciation for the hard work Rei is putting in. He then further gives the little one some coins and tells him to treat himself well. With that, they proceed to leave, but it is then that the bald man Humphrey notices Rei's injured ear. So, he quickly turns towards our boy. It doesn't take long for Rei to sense the shift in the atmosphere, so he quickly hides his ear because he knows he has been recognized, but before the bald man can react, his boss calls out to him, telling him to stop standing there idly. Eventually, they all leave the place in their nice car. Meanwhile, Rei knows that Humphrey had recognized the wound on his ear, but he is not sure why that man left without saying anything. Rei and that shop owner then hurry to Niels to inquire about the outcome of the negotiations, and sadly enough, the only thing Niels has to say is that the negotiations failed, so the conflict is inevitable. The shop owner is dismayed to hear this news. Niels then elaborates that the terms Hector was demanding were simply unreasonable. He basically wanted Niels's entire organization to submit to his control, which is even worse than engaging in a conflict with those men. He then apologizes to both the shop owner and Rei and advises them to remain cautious and stay in the hideout. After leaving the shop, Rei walks alone through the streets. As he does, he reflects how difficult it would be to navigate the streets if the conflict were to break out. In order to prepare for the impending crisis, he decides to gather as much food as possible beforehand. Suddenly, he notices Humphrey in the car, which Rei finds very suspicious because he had never seen a car like his in Sector 50, so he decides to investigate. Later, we find ourselves at the entrance to Hector's group on 18th Street. The big boss himself, Hector, is acting as nothing more than a subordinate in the presence of this man who emerges from the car. The man's presence is commanding, and it's still unknown who this figure actually is. The monocle over his left eye only makes him even more stand out. Even Rei doesn't seem to recognize this man. He then takes note of this man's vessel's color, which is dark blue, and calling it black wouldn't be incorrect either. That color resembles the mana of golems when they move. Also, he is curious about the rings around this man's vessel. Not only that, there is a significant amount of mana surrounding the rings as well, and it's as if he is using those rings to contain the mana from escaping. He is certain that that man is dangerous and he needs to inform Niels about it. The scene transitions to 17th Street, Niels's group, where we can see that Niels's men are also preparing for the impending battle. Rei also arrives there and startles this guard by appearing out of the blue because he is unsure how Rei even got inside the base, to which Rei states that the gate was open. He then inquires about the whereabouts of Niels, to which the man explains that his boss went out to prepare for the war, and it's dangerous, so Rei should also be leaving as well since Niels is not here. Rei decides to simply convey his message through this guard, but he is unsure how to explain to this guard that those guys have a magic user in their ranks, so he simply tells the guard to relay the message to Niels that he should be wary of the man with a monocle. Later, Rei returns to the kids in the tent, but Rei sits outside, accompanied by Pale. Pale questions him about his opinion regarding who is going to emerge victorious in this conflict. Well, Rei is uncertain about which side to support, especially since both groups seem to be evenly matched. Personally, Rei is rooting for Niels because he believes it's the only way the safety of the children can be assured. If Hector wins this war, the street children will be sold into slavery. Suddenly, they hear a terrifying noise, which puts Rei on high alert. The scene then quickly shifts to 17th Street, where Niels's soldiers are trying their best to fight off against these golems, but all of that barrage of bullets has no effect on these creatures. In retaliation, the creature unleashes a massive amount of dark blue magical energy that decimates everything in its path, and as if that is not enough, the golem dispatches those men with his bare hands like they were mere tomatoes. The one manipulating those golems is, of course, this monocle-wearing bastard. He is feeling very pleased with his creations and further commands them to eliminate everything here. We then transition back under the bridge where the kids live. While Rei is planning to join the fray, Pale quickly grabs him by the hand and stops him from going, as they are arguing about who should go and assess the situation. Their skirmish ends up waking Josephine up, but Pale quickly tells her that they will be back soon enough, so she should go back inside the tent and have some sleep. Finally, Pale concedes to our boy's insistence. He decides to stay with the children here while he gives Rei the green light to venture further. He also tells him not to go too far and to return as soon as he figures out what is happening. After promising to return as soon as possible, Rei finally reaches the scene, and everything is in a state of chaos. The aftermath of the battle is brutal. Everything is engulfed in flames, and the soldiers are scattered around with missing limbs. The one red-haired soldier we had seen before still seems to be alive. He reveals to our boy that those bastards had brought golems with them, and the man with the monocle was controlling them. He then warns Ray to flee before his life is extinguished. He dies on the spot as he is also torn apart into 2 equal pieces. It breaks Ray's heart to witness this unnecessary bloodshed. He closes the poor soldier's eyes, grabs the dagger from the ground, and decides to proceed. He is certain that the way things are going, Niels is bound to lose, so he wants to assist him in any way he can. While Ray is occupied, we shift back to the bridge at the same time where all the children live. Well, it appears that not even the children were spared. They have been brutally slaughtered, and only Pale remains holding Josephine in his arms. The one behind all this bloodshed is one of the golems we had seen before. The soulless bastard begins to coalesce this dark blue energy in the palm of his hand to unleash it upon Pale, while Pale, on the other hand, sheds his last remaining tears as he wishes for Ray not to return. The 17th Street of Central Plaza had just gone up in flames. The man had arrived exclusively late to the horrific scene. All he could see were the corpses of Niels' underlings, but strangely, his own corpse was nowhere to be found, indicating that he was still alive. A loud rumbling took his attention from behind. Ray turned around quickly, realizing the direction it came from, understanding that he ran towards the tent. When he got here, panting and exhausted from all the running, it was yet another dreadful sight he witnessed, the remains of someone right up ahead of the golem monster. Filled with rage, Ray moved to attack this monster with his flaming sword, but the monster quickly turned back with its sharp senses and executed a heavy gut punch against the boy's stomach. Bro came at him with a full Mike Tyson swing. Anyway, Ray felt immense pain as he crashed into a wall on the brink of defeat. He doesn't want to give up and hopes to assure his loved ones are all safe. It was at this moment that a voice called out in his mind. He relived the memories of the children, the people who adored him every time he came back. It empowered him for a moment before those mellow memories became a terrifying nightmare. All of those children had been brutally murdered. Lorraine, Leia, Corden, Miles, Josephine, and Pale were all gone. Ray pitifully denied the reality, reaching out for them. He can't accept the loss of their lives without having to repay them for their kindness. But it matters very little since the silver-haired boy is about to meet his own end here. He hears a familiar sound, the same sound that he heard during a fight. This was the bastard golem who became responsible for ending their lives, and now it is preparing a blast to end Ray too. These helpless children, as well as Niels's men, and even the people in the street, the bloodbath that followed, was all because of this monster. Ray took it upon himself to exact revenge no matter the cost. He uses every fiber of his being, every last bit of his energy, pulling it together until he has enough to stand. But Ray's body didn't obey until a powerful car was chucked at the golem from out of nowhere, sending it crashing away. From inside the vehicle comes out Niels, who rescues Ray. Thankfully, the kid hasn't received any major injuries, but the boy is dreadful and discouraged to share the news of the deceased children. Niels horrifically turns and realizes what went down. He apologizes to the child for being too late to the scene. Ray doesn't want to accept it as his fault. Niels, realizing that the boy is deeply grieving and blaming himself for their lives, hugs him for comfort. As for his subordinates, they're all dead. The one responsible is definitely Hector, who called mages from the outside to kill them all. The question is, what's he going to do now? Niels intends to return to the street in the hopes of scouting for survivors before he's about to talk about his next part of the plan. Niels is shot with a damn laser beam right through his chest. Ray's eyes turn to shock as he sees the golem standing behind, having just dealt the final move on Niels. Poor guy got a hole in his chest, and he's still smiling. What a man. Niels collapses in the boy's arms with Ray despairingly calling for his name. He doesn't even know what happened just now. His heart beats incredibly fast as he remembers training with Niels and sharing all his memories. The boy's heart beats with a vengeance to confront the damning golem who killed off everyone he cared about. The golem aims to kill the boy, but this time Ray is the one fuming with the thoughts of killing everything in his path. Black rain poured. There was loss, defeat, and guilt, but more than anything, what Ray wanted the most was to escape from this horrifying nightmare and wake up to correct everything. But this was just the reality he could do nothing about. The golem pointed its hand towards him, aiming to finish the boy. The boy, in response, does the same, his powers charging in a bright red. Both of them prepared their one final attack and, at last, released the two beams. The destructive beams collided with each other, but one thing was different about Ray: he was an emotion, not a robot. He had reasons and emotions to fight for. That's why his attack became overwhelming for the golem. The fiery storm of hellfire erupted and engulfed the creature, reducing it to nothing but rubble. By the time his attack ended, molten remains were carved into the earth's flesh. Next, the boy hurried to try and help Niels to wake up. He didn't want him to die no matter what happened. Interestingly, Niels was still breathing in his final moments. He is in extreme agony and never thought he'd get a peaceful death, but the last thing he expected was that he was going to die today of all things. Reflecting that he's got no reflections in his life, Ray calmly accepts that he accomplished a lot from where he started off, but he made the mistake of struggling much later in life than he should have, which makes him regret and feel guilt about the situation. Niels was just around the boy's age when it happened. Ray wants to leave and find medicine from the car, but he is stopped by the much older man. He wants the kid to do one thing, and that is to leave this wretched place. Niels wishes for the boy to live a better life elsewhere. They've always shared a close connection as if they were brothers, but now Niels only wants the best for Ray to reach the top instead of staying at the bottom. Saying those words, the last bit of life extinguishes from Niels's body as his hand slips away from the boy's palm. Now he was no more in this world. Ray only had moments to accept what had just taken place. Before long he was filled with fury and despair, roaring into the rain, the first emotions he ever felt. After that, the kid sat near the wreckage and didn't move for a while. He's still in pain and shock, unable to describe what happened as anything but a dream. Just recalling the horrific massacre of yesterday, the people he lost, and his emotions spiraling like crazy, something was different about the situation. Ray casts a bit of flame in his palm, realizing that his emotions are directly correlated to the strength of his fire spells, but also overdoing it can easily extinguish his spells too, which happens just now. Ray realizes that he can't wait any longer and decides to move. The deceased bodies of his loved ones have all been cared for. His next mission is to exact revenge, no longer caring about the moral consequences of his actions. Back to the 17th Street, the pile of bodies is being collected. Everyone now knows that Hector won by a long shot and that everything here will get so much more difficult from now. The scumbags make fun of Niels for not accepting their offer. Ray's already here, having located his targets with a knife in his hand. Suddenly he's grabbed by someone from behind and instantly swipes the man's throat clean with a single slash, but that slash wasn't deep enough to kill this guy, and he tries his best to reason with the kid. Ray doesn't care about who he's fighting, as his only goal is to annihilate the entirety of the Hector group as a whole. He slashes the hell out of this guy's body, giving him a shock to the system. He can't fathom how this kid is even stronger than he was before. If he doesn't respond properly, Ray is going to beat him decisively and end his life, so he willingly allows himself to get stabbed in the shoulder, which is a shock to Ray, but this moment is met with an equal trade-off as the man hammers Ray down with a powerful punch. He understands how foolish and reckless the boy is for risking his own life for revenge. That's why at this moment, the man gives him an offer that's going to please Ray. Egghead reasons that he shouldn't die like a dog in an effort to exact his revenge. The boy gets up and learns from the man that he's been closely observed for a while now. He wants the kid to hear him out on this one time. Silent Humphrey, they call Egghead that because he's the most silent assassin out there, and now Humphrey is the one who's making the face of desperation, which is proof enough that he isn't going to deceive the boy. Ray accepts hearing him out and learns that Humphrey wants the kid to leave the sector. His reason is to find the man's brother, who Hector sold off in the City of Mages. Hector mentioned that if Humphrey worked under him for a decade, he'd reveal the location of his brother. That's the sole reason he's been working for him, and right around this time, he believes his brother should be around Ray's age, but it isn't clear to the boy why he should take on the request in the first place. Humphrey finally reveals Ray's secret. He understands that the kid knows how to use magic. It comes as a shock, but Humphrey continues that he was certain after seeing his fight in the warehouse. Despite the boy's small use of magic right now, it still won't be enough to defeat Hector as he stands. After all, Hector is always guarded by an extremely powerful mage, so the chances of killing him on a whim are next to nothing. The pitch-black mana emanating from that mage is fearful enough. Humphrey describes this image as a demon. On the off chance that someone from their side tries to betray them, that mage freezes them entirely. Humphrey vividly recalls a guy suffocating to death with a bowl of water placed around his head. That mage is just too powerful, extremely powerful. That's why he wants the kid to leave this place for the time being so that he can exact his revenge much later in life when he has the chance. Ray can't deny Humphrey's rationale. After all, he's yet to learn magic and only used it by what he assumed was right. If he's fighting an expert mage, he's going to have zero chances of winning that encounter. The City of Mages is near the upstream of the Elton River, and only mages are allowed to step foot inside. Humphrey gives the boy all the saved-up money he collected over his life. The same goes for information on his brother's personality and characteristics. Ray is shocked that he's being entrusted with the money. After all, he could always betrayed Humphrey, but after seeing the boy for a while, this guy knows that the kid is one to maintain his promises, and he's seen enough from the boy to conclude that he can easily advance to a higher-level sector. Humphrey supports Ray the same way Niels once did. He insists the boy hurry and come to a decision, as they have little time. Ray makes up his own condition. He wants Humphrey to properly take care of the corpses at the underpass, and then he'll search for his brother. It's an easy deal, and Humphrey easily accepts. Ray decides to go, claiming that he'll return in one piece. Yes, the One Piece is real. Ray ran as fast as he could to ensure no one followed him. He arrives before Grandma Viola, tossing her a coin to ask a quick question. The granny happily inquires what the boy asks of her. Ray wants to confirm if the story about the rainbow is true or not. He wonders if he'll finally be able to make a wish upon encountering a rainbow. Ray dives into an old memory that he shared with one of the underpass kids. He joyously talked about the tale of the rainbow and how anyone would be able to make a wish if they found the point where a rainbow touches the ground. Ray thought about it with seriousness for some reason, and that leads to the current day. The granny concludes that rainbows do exist, even if the wishing aspect is ignored. The boy senses that there's no hesitation in her mana, always remaining a clear purple like always. The kid remembers when he asked Humphrey, who was reminded of the time he was asked about a rainbow from a kid too. That same mage was also looking for a rainbow, which also means they have proof of their existence. The boy questions Viola if he will be able to resurrect the day upon discovering the rainbow's end. Instead of giving him a clear answer, she ambiguously states that anyone can make any wish come true, so maybe it's true. Does it feel like the granny is gaslighting him here? Because I really can't tell. What do you guys think? Viola claims that rainbows are hard to find, and nobody knows where they are, but her answer is enough for Ray, who leaves and departs Viola with a request to find a new place. Anyway, Ray is now on the outskirts of Sector 50. He's observing the coordinates that Niels wrote down. Reading them, he locates the vehicle Niels prepared, a 4-seater sedan just in case. The boy reaches for the door handle when one of Hector's lackeys comes out to catch him. He wonders if Niels gave him an order to retrieve the car, and just to mess with the boy's emotions he provokes him by asking about Niels's emotions. Ray was confident that he wasn't being chased by any more of Hector's men, but it turns out that one caught up to him regardless. He can't waste time and clutches the door handle to get inside. The man bolts at him, and before Ray is about to close the door, the man catches it open. He roars at the kid to open the door. Ray, already exhausted much of his mana, so his strengthening magic isn't working wonders here, forces a fire spell, precisely aiming at the guy into a finger beam before blasting his brains off. He kicks the corpse away and steps on the pedal full speed. Ray's finally going to experience what life is like outside of Sector 50. Having arrived someplace far away, the kid comes to a stop before inspecting the car's trunk. He's rather surprised that Niels was so well prepared that he stashed enough water and food supplies in the back. Still, it's going to come to use since he won't be arriving into the next sector before a bunch of days pass. That night, Ray lit himself a fire and decided that it was important to get more information on magic in the next sector. As for what he knows for certain, Ray understands that there are 2 forms of mana. The first is red mana, which can be used without any preparation. The second mana requires numerous colors to be utilized all at once. Mana isn't just easy to manipulate. However, after channeling certain emotions, he can utilize some of it more easily. Rage is just one example. His activation trigger is Rage for now, and that's how the boy is able to cast that kind of mana. Unfortunately, he has hit his limit. Anytime he loses concentration on his emotions, the mana ends up slipping away, so he decides to play with the combinations next, forging a bunch of different colors in his palm. The boy observes something interesting taking place before his eyes, but unfortunately, nothing becomes a product of this combination of mana. Certain types repel each other, and combining colors requires immense effort, which also takes a toll on his mental energy. But in response, some combinations work well in unison. He wants to play around with the experimentation for now. It wasn't as needed before, but his circumstances are now different. Ray has got every reason to do so. So, in order to get what he wants, he drives around before coming to another stop. The next day, today he was able to play around with a bunch of different combinations to cast ice, wind, and earth-type magic. The boy wonders if he can utilize mana inside his vessel and then use it whenever needed. It would make his conjuring process a lot easier if that happened. It's kind of like mana circles surrounding a mage's vessel. Ray is ready to find something like that after he reaches Sector 49. As for Sector 50, let's see how things are holding up near the bridge. Hector's men are searching around, but they've found no traces of the golem. Hector suddenly orders one of them to hold the end of his cane. This guy is sweating bullets while apologizing to his master for failing the task, but Hector is shown to be a very no-nonsense guy who doesn't like men that fail him. The poor guy taps the end of his cane before his hand experiences a jolt of electrifying pain. He is quickly turned into a block of ice as an example for others. Hector then pushes the statue down, calling him a useless piece of trash. Another one of his men reports that they've found traces of the golem around the area. Hector is intrigued to find that there's a certain kind of mana lingering in the air. That means some powerful magic was used. He could also sense mana lingering from nearby. When he goes up to inspect the traces, Hector asks his men if someone actually lived here. The underling reports that a bunch of street children lived here, orphans that are probably no longer here to avoid war. But Hector is shocked. He can't stomach the thought of an orphan using such magic. The very thought of it makes him succumb to a maniacal laughter. The fact that one boy was able to conjure powerful magic and its configurations all by himself, the very thought of it seems impossible. So he clings to a more reasonable theory that another mage must have come here to destroy the golem. He wants his men to investigate what happened. Underneath, some part of Hector thinks that if an orphan kid did pull off the impossible, then that boy must have the potential of a genius archmage and could become a force to be reckoned with. It's about time, but finally, Ray has arrived in Sector 49. Before he came to Sector 49, the boy had a talk with Niels before he died. He learned about Sector 42 being in a similar state of chaos and also learned that it was much bigger in size. The buildings were bigger and there were streets, but it wasn't anything special. But if you go upstream, the sectors experienced notable changes. That was the case for the 49th sector. Ray, having stepped foot here, is shocked to remark about its size. There's also a lot of weird things going on around him. There are no golems in sight either, so he wonders if they're only home to the 50th sector. The boy moves along, hearing many people chat about their lives. Arriving at the 36th street, he has confirmed that there are way too many streets here compared to his previous sector. Ray wants to advance his pace and learn as much as possible about magic, especially the mage Hector and his vessel circles. That's going to become his key to exact his revenge. Then there's his objective to look into the prismatic colors and the city of mages, not to mention that he has to get a job to acquire money. While he's got the money from Humphrey to survive for a while, this journey is going to need more than that. Ray suddenly spots a bookstore in front of him, the Veronica bookstore. The name itself is enough to draw the boy's attention, but he's never known a bookstore and doesn't know what it means. Recalling one other conversation with Niels, the boy learned about many things from him. He learned how to read for the most part, so he's eager to explore this bookstore. Inside, he sees squares filled with letters to label them. Ray hasn't ever known about something like this before. Suddenly, one voice calls to him. It's a red-haired girl who accuses him of breaking the window and stealing her books again. She's seriously annoyed that this guy has shown up to steal from her again, but Ray doesn't know why this damsel is in distress or why she's accusing him. He learns that the books are the items inside the store. The girl emphasizes her point and orders him to leave. He can see a plethora of colors emanating from her emotions of excitement, joy, discomfort, and annoyance. The boy wonders if it's even humanly possible to feel so many emotions all at once. She's out here screaming at him like a mad woman while Ray is questioning what she's ranting about. The boy calls her a weirdo, which gets on her nerves as she becomes supremely angry and tries to remind him of her father's status. Ray doesn't want to deal with a problematic child, so he leaves on his own back to the streets. He sharply observes a bunch of kids looking at him with a cautious gaze. The boy understands because he's a stranger who's just entered their sector after all. Ray now understands that this part isn't any different from what happens in Sector 50. Back to his car, he collects his thoughts. Ray has explored a bunch of streets and yet he ultimately failed in searching for something related to magic. He wants to invest his search into wider areas tomorrow until he hears something nearby. It's the same kids again, and they've come here to beat him up. Ray isn't surprised and senses 4 of these guys from his car. The kids all draw near until they reach the door handle. Their intention isn't to kill but to knock him out without any noise. They also want to snatch the car keys and steal the food, but before any of the kids can make a move, Ray shatters the window and takes down one of them with ease. With one guy down, the rest are startled. Ray jumps out to target the blue hoodie kid. He knocks the kid out with one swing across his chest. That's 2 down. The third kid attempts to kill Ray with the full swing of his metal pipe. Unfortunately, he greatly underestimated his opponent as Ray catches the pipe with little to no trouble and tosses it away. The boy, now intimidated, orders Ray not to draw any closer. Ray, on the other hand, fearsome as ever, instructs the children to hold their teeth shut. Then he proceeds to beat the ever-living out of them until they're reduced to a sorry state.